Hey everybody, Matt Barton here with this week's Broker Minute or Two. And before I kick this off, let me just wish you all at the tail end of this week a very Merry Christmas and, here's to a Happy New Year for all of us. Hey, so I still get, please don't tune out when you hear what I'm going to cover today. It'll be short, but I still get an inordinate amount of questions either about these three items or closely related to them. And they have to deal with Section 3 of our REPC, which has essentially three components: settlement, closing, and possession, right? And, let me just say this part at the front end. We work so hard through a transaction, get through so many things to get under contract, to negotiate prices, to negotiate due diligence items and all that stuff. And we've worked so hard, and it can all be screwed up at the end here and get our respective clients pissed off and thinking that we haven't done a good job if we mess up this step. So it's my request that you pay attention to what I have to say about this today, because some of you still don't understand the complete linkage between all of these things, because I get questions like, hey, we went and settled and my buyer wants to, or the buyer side wants to move stuff into the house or move stuff into the garage, and can we do that? And I can't tell you how many times I get questions related to that. So let's go through this real quickly. The three components: settlement. Section 24D says that both parties will perform settlement by a deadline, and that deadline typically has a 5 o'clock time frame on it. And it says that settlement in this paragraph will only occur when the following have been completed. So item A, buyer and seller have signed and delivered to each other, and the escrow offices all the documents required, and by the lender and the title insurance company, by any written escrow instructions. And then item B says, and here's an interesting one, any money is required to be paid by the buyer or seller under these documents except for the new loan. Right? So if it's a cash deal, cash has got to be delivered then, or settlement has not been performed. If your Section 2 has a 20%, bringing cash to close, then that needs to be delivered. Otherwise, you have not performed settlement. So kind of a big deal if you're not paying attention. All right. So let's assume we deliver all of those things. By the way, earnest money, I've had the questions about that. I've had this discussion with the DRE. The fact that the earnest money is delivered to a trust account that is monitored by the state, that is considered delivery, even though we will eventually work that out with the title company. Section 3.2, closing. Closing. All right. So specific items that have to take place. And by the way, I still hear several of us talk and use the term closing when we're talking settlement. Please don't do that. It's confusing to your clients, right? They think closing, when they hear closing, that means, hey, it's now, my property. But if we're using it in the context of settlement, which we shouldn't, they get confused. So use the appropriate terms: settlement, closing, possession. All right. And I stuck with the motif here, right? Red, yellow, and green, kind of like a stoplight. Red, you haven't really done much. Yellow, you're getting there. Green, we're good to go. All right, so closing, settlement has to be completed up in the red section. B, the proceeds of any new loan have been delivered to the lender. And C, the applicable closing documents have been recorded where? In the office of the county recorder. So quick example, last week had one of the agents, his sellers didn't have anywhere to go over the weekend. The settlement deadline was Friday at 5 o'clock. Don't have them sign at 5. Sign before 5. Make sure it's completed before 5. Otherwise, you're in default. And so they came in and signed at 4, which means it's not going to typically fund and record. And so closing would not take place until Monday, which means they get to stay in the property through the weekend. As you might imagine, the buyers had a different idea. They thought they'd be moving in on Friday evening, Saturday, and Sunday. But if you go strictly by the terms of the contract, which governs, the seller had every right to do that. They were doing nothing nefarious, nothing wrong. It was absolutely in agreement with the terms of the contract. All right, the last one is possession, right? And there's 3 options here: upon recording, hours after recording, and days after recording. Please be careful with upon recording. We run into a lot of problems with this. Quite literally means once it's recorded at the county, the buyer, the seller is supposed to be out. And that's not the way it typically plays out, right? And I don't know if it's because the first selection, we get a lot of those, and then we have a problem, and somebody's trying to move in, and the seller's like, I don't have time to move out. No, there's a default. Let's call the police. And oh my gosh, going back to what I started with, this is where we should be taking extra care that this all finishes off nicely so they're thrilled with our service, not dealing with a major problem. So what I prefer, unless the property's vacant, do it upon recording. Cool. If the seller is still there, put in something in hours after recording or days after recording, right? They want to see that everything is copacetic, that the money's transferred, all is well, and then they typically want to move their stuff out. And if it's spelled out in here that we have 24, 48, 72 hours, whatever the case may be after recording, then there's no reason the buyer should have an expectation to be moving in, right, until that is completed. Same thing with calendar days. And note this, on the hours after recording, this is the one exception in our REPC. If it recorded at 3 o'clock on one day and you had 48 hours, then 3 o'clock 2 days later, your people are contractually supposed to be out. Last term on this is Section 3.3 shall survive closing. So even though ownership will have transferred at closing, since Section 3.3 survived closing, it means they have the seller has a contractual right to be there until such time has expired. All right, so this is my plead, my ask is please pay attention to this, not only for my sanity, but for your sanity, and so that our clients are thrilled, especially when everything's wrapping up, with how well we handled the transaction. With that, I wish you a very successful 2024, and we will talk soon.